Welcome to the next installment in AlertFind's webinar series. Today we are talking earthquake preparedness, key strategies to protect your business. You can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtags earthquake preparedness and AF webinar, and we'll be live tweeting this whole thing at AlertFindCom. I'd also like to invite anyone who has questions during the presentation and would like them addressed kind of immediately, or they're on the topic that our speaker is talking about, to just drop those questions into the chat box and we'll work them in as they come in. I am so pleased today to introduce you to Stephen Eberlein, earthquake preparedness and emergency management expert. Stephen Eberlein is an experienced health and safety professional with the American Red Cross. He has dedicated his career to promoting safety and preparedness at both the corporate and personal levels. Stephen's expertise of the Sri Lanka tsunami in 2004 inspired him to focus on helping the Pacific Northwest prepare for disasters of all kinds, including a Cascadia earthquake. He authored the Prepare Out Loud Community Preparedness Program in 2016 to challenge the Pacific Northwest to create a culture of preparedness. Stephen is a well-known public speaker making appearances around the country. His popular TEDx talk, Why Do We Not Prepare for Earthquakes, presents ideas from his Prepare Out Loud program and encourages attendees to be vocal about their preparedness. And I will be your moderator today, Danielle Ricci, the Vice President of Marketing for AlertFind. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. We're so thrilled to have you.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So let me give you all a quick agenda for today. Today we're going to cover the unique threat that earthquakes pose in the US and around the globe, how businesses need to prepare for earthquakes, how to shift to a more sustainable preparedness mindset, and how to promote personal preparedness with employee benefits businesses. So Stephen, I just want to jump right in and ask you, can you give us some background on earthquakes in the US and their effect on businesses?
Yeah, I can. Well, here's the interesting thing about the US and earthquakes. We don't have really big earthquakes very often. So I need to talk a little bit about the earthquakes that we could potentially have, such as the one that you're looking at right here. What we're looking at here is a Cascadia subduction zone 9-point earthquake. And what happens in the event of this kind of earthquake is that you have the entire infrastructure of an entire region of the U.S., in this case, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, all the way up to Canada, sacrificed essentially at the same time. We're talking roads, sewage, water, electricity, airports, access to medical services, access to public safety services, impacted all simultaneously. We haven't, even though we think that we frequently have earthquakes in California and we do have frequent earthquakes in Alaska, what we don't have are frequent earthquakes of this scale, such as we just saw, that impact not just a city, but an entire region of the United States. And this is the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, but we have similar earthquakes that are possible in places like the Midwest with the New Madrid fault. And the problem is we're a pretty young country. We built these cities only 150 years to 200 years ago, and we built them without the understanding of the risk. So when we're talking about we haven't experienced what could happen yet, which is part of why businesses and individuals struggle to be ready. Would you like to go to the next slide?
Ready.
The thing about an earthquake is not the only disaster that happens during an earthquake. See, an earthquake kicks off a lot of secondary disasters, such as we're seeing here. If you look to the upper left, this is the phenomenon known as liquefaction, where the groundwater table essentially comes up to the surface and floods a city. Looking to the right, upper right, you know what you're looking at there. You're looking at the Tohoku tsunami of 2011. Down left, you can see the facades of buildings peeling off, and down right, you can see landslides. So one of the difficulties of an earthquake is that the shaking is only one of the pieces of damage that we need to be ready for. It sets off lots of secondary emergencies. Now, as a business, you can imagine, as you look at these pictures and these images, the multiplicity of ways that these events could impact your business, and it essentially impacts the infrastructure that you rely on for your business. And let's go to your next slide real quick. So this is what I tell businesses and audiences to expect of the aftermath of an earthquake. This picture. Now, what you're looking at here, listen, this is not earthquake damage. What this actually is, this is an eminent domain dispute that played out in Shanghai. That said, it gives you it's a good metaphor for what any business or individual should expect after a major earthquake. You're going to be stuck as an individual and as a business. As an individual, you might be stuck on the highway. You might be stuck at work. You might be stuck at your kid's school. You might be stuck at the mall, but you're going to be physically stuck for some period of time without access, without the ability to easily leave or to have people come to you or services come to you. Go ahead, next slide. And not only are you stuck, you're stuck without the main services that you have relied upon consistently as an individual and a business for every single day that you've been living in the United States. Things like your ability to drive a car, running water, flushing toilets, gas heat, cell phone coverage, access to the internet, debit cards, credit cards, and electricity can be impacted all at the same time by this earthquake. And I don't need to throw a lot of statistics at you about how risky this would be for your business to be impacted, to have all the services your business runs on be impacted simultaneously. You want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, so how is this impacting business? I mean, we just talked about the lack of services, but are there, specific business impacts that we should think about?
Sure. Well, probably the best place to look to start to understand the business impact wouldn't be the United States. It'd actually be looking to Christchurch, New Zealand. Christchurch, New Zealand suffered a pair of major earthquakes in 2010 and 2011. And to just look at a really high level at the business impact there, we know that it cost about 10% of the New Zealand GDP to start putting Christchurch back together again. We know it cost about $30 billion to get one of the main cities in New Zealand back to business shape. We know that construction jobs went up by 4,500 in the city of Christchurch, which shouldn't be a huge surprise given all the rebuilding. But the other side of that is that sectors such as lodging, accommodation, tourism, food, services, retail, those jobs dropped by about 23% in the city. And overall, we saw about 9,000 people leave Christchurch as a direct impact of that earthquake. And when we look at the United States, what we're looking at here, we're looking at the current seismic hazard zone of the United States, where you can see essentially the entire West Coast is considered a hot zone, and also a number of places that we don't talk about, such as Salt Lake City, Utah, such as Las Vegas, Nevada, such as the New Madrid fault system, which in the event of that earthquake, you've got Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Nashville, Tennessee being impacted at once. And when we talk earthquakes, we don't think Memphis, Tennessee, but those are the kinds of places that need to get ready. But let's talk about the states that aren't in the earthquake zone. Let's just say that you are doing business out of South Dakota. Let me ask you this. As a business in South Dakota, are you doing any trade with California? Are you relying on services from a company in Seattle, Washington? Do you have a key supplier that's in St. Louis, Missouri? all businesses are interconnected. So even if you aren't directly impacted by a shaking event, because luckily for you, you live in Texas, I guarantee one of the products that you need, one of the services that you're using is in an active earthquake zone right now, which means none of us are immune to the possible impacts of an earthquake. And we know we're not ready, and the businesses don't take the steps to get ready. You can see just this quick survey that was done that 74% of small businesses don't have a recovery plan, 84% don't have natural disaster insurance, and 71% don't have generators in case of a power outage. Part of the reason we don't get ready for disasters, especially like earthquakes, is because of their infrequency. Just because they're infrequent, though, doesn't mean that they can't happen. And the problem with earthquakes and that infrequency is that the devastation that they do cause, we're doubly unprepared for them because we don't take the time to calculate it into our business decisions.
So what's the average warning that you get for an earthquake?
The average warning is basically 0. So let's take, for example, let me show you how it actually plays out. Again, I'm going to use the Cascadia subduction zone as an example. Now, you see that red fault line going north to south? That's where the fault line is unzipping. And if you look at that video to the upper left, that's essentially what's happening along that fault line, is that you've got one plate suddenly slipping under another one, causing a thrusting action. Now, you see those yellow rings that are coming off that fault line? That's called a P wave. The P wave is the first impact you usually feel from an earthquake. It's like a jolt and a jackhammering under your feet. It doesn't actually do a lot of damage, but it's warning of a second, more damaging wave that follows. That second wave, which are those red rings, that's what's called an S wave. The S wave is where the land begins to roll vertically, where it begins to slide back and forth laterally. The S waves are what does all the damage. Now, the P wave is a bit faster than the S wave, so it is usually the warning that you get. But as far as a formal warning for an earthquake, we don't have a formal warning system at this point. Now, if you live in tornado country, you know that you can probably expect 10 minutes to an hour from meteorologists to say, hey, there's a high risk that a tornado is coming through. In the case of a hurricane, you've probably got as much as 10 days when they're forecasting that a hurricane is likely to come through the Florida Panhandle. The case of an earthquake, you're not going to have that warning. All that we have right now as far as earthquake warning is probabilities. Probabilities like there's a 37% chance that Oregon will be impacted by a major earthquake in the next 50 years. That's hardly helpful. That's not the kind of warning that we're looking for. But luckily, at least for the West Coast, there is a more formal warning system that is in the works. If we go to the next slide real quick, I'll show you what that looks like. So there's something called a shake alert system that is in development right now, and it is being used in a limited fashion by some utilities in major sectors. But you remember that P wave that we looked at before, that yellow wave, that first one that we feel? So the way that the shake alert system works is they put sensors near the fault line, near the suspected epicenters, and what it does is it detects that P wave the moment that it comes off a fault line, and it accelerates the process by sending that detection to an earthquake alert center that after that can be forwarded to a number of different devices, computers, emails, apps, and straight to emergency rooms. It can get ahead of the earthquake. But what kind of warning are we talking about? We're talking about at most, maybe 90 seconds to 2 minutes in the best case scenario. In most cases, right now, you're not going to get really any warning at all unless you detect the P wave. But hopefully in the future, we'll have somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 seconds to 2 minutes of warning. And the way that warning might come through, we can see on the next slide. this is what we hope to be the future. Now, with the shake alert system, again, looking at those P waves coming off the fault line, that hopefully, just like in Japan, you'll get an alert on your telephone that says, there is an earthquake coming in 2, 1, everyone's in position already before the shaking even starts to keep you safe. Now, you can imagine, I know that a minute, 90 seconds doesn't seem like a lot, but imagine all the things that you can do with that 90 seconds. You can choose to not get onto a bridge. You can choose to get under a table. You can stop a surgery, for that matter. You can get off an elevator. There are a number of small life-saving actions you can take in those 60 and 90 seconds, that right now you're not going to have that kind of warning. The shake alert system is, again, it's still in development. It's still being built out, and there's a lot of public education that needs to take place before we see that kind of alert like we saw in that video. But we can expect something like that on the West Coast probably sometime in the next 5 to 7 years.
Great. So I want to ask you now how businesses and residents should start becoming earthquake ready.
Sure, and I'm gonna go ahead.
We got a question about that last bit.
Yeah, you bet.
What was the tool called that detects the shaking?
So the system is called Shake Alert. And the app that we were just looking at there is called the Shake Alert app. It is available on your phone right now. It's in beta. So I don't know how it would behave right now in beta form, but Shake Alert is the tool.
Thanks. Okay, so back to the main question. How can businesses and residents start becoming earthquake ready?
Sure. Let's go to the next slide. So businesses and residents, you're going to take some of the same steps. One of the first things that I recommend doing is something that a lot of people don't do in earthquake country, which is just do everything you can to make sure that people, whether it's you at home with your kids or you and your people at work, just making sure that people don't get hurt at work. So I'm going to show you what I did at home, because it's the exact same thing that your facilities team can do at work. At home, I went and got some L brackets. I got some good long sturdy screws. I got myself a stud finder. Actually, I just went and asked my neighbor for one. I didn't have one. And I got some earthquake straps, which you can find easily on Amazon. And then, next slide, I went into my home and I started identifying big furniture like this. And you can think about the big cabinets and bookshelves that you have in your workplaces in the same way. You start finding the studs behind them, and you start taking those earthquake straps, and you secure big cabinetry like this so that it doesn't fall over on people. This is easy. This is super affordable, and it's a complete game changer, because let's remember that, for one, earthquakes cause a lot of injuries. I know it seems trite to say, but they cause a lot of injuries. And there is not going to be ready access to medical attention after a major earthquake, because the supply and demand is just out of order, right? That you've got too many injuries, you've got not enough personnel to respond to those injuries, and you've got compromised infrastructure. So making sure that you've done everything you can at your business or home to minimize the risk of injury is one of the first things you need to do. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'd say this is a business measure. For businesses that have potentially dangerous chemicals and gases as part of your manufacturing process, I'd start looking at the piping that those gases and liquids go through. And if possible, get a double or triple encasement, which is going to make those pipes more resilient to an earthquake and less likely to spill dangerous noxious gases and liquids into the atmosphere that can hurt your people. Go ahead, next slide. And I'd say this is on the business side. And wherever you are in the country, this is something you might want to look into. This is specifically for Portland. Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, and I imagine a number of emergency management agencies across the country, offer post-earthquake safety evaluation seminars for engineers. And what you can do with this, take, for example, Intel. I know Intel has put people through this course. They've got a big facility in Hillsboro, Oregon. And their thought is that, well, we have a facility that we need to bring back online and make operable as quickly as possible. And the city is going to want to send out earthquake inspectors building by building by building to say, yes, this is safe, or no, this is not safe. And that's going to take a tremendous amount of time to get to their business. And so they send their own facilities engineers through these courses to get accreditation in post-seismic inspections so that they have the licensure and the accreditation to say, yes, this building is safe, it is habitable, it is operable, we are good to go after an earthquake. And the idea, of course, is what can we do to minimize business disruption? And again, this probably isn't available in every city, but take a look. Post-earthquake safety evaluation would be your key term there. Go your next slide. And thinking about individuals, thinking about businesses at the same time, one of the most important measures you can take to get ready for an earthquake is water. Water is something that we don't have to go without very often. Everyone on the phone right now, I guarantee you've gone through a power outage. Everyone has probably gone through some level of winter storm and been stuck at home. Very few of us have actually endured a long water outage, which is precisely what you should expect after a major earthquake in any of these earthquake zones that we just talked about. In the Pacific Northwest, specifically, in the Pacific Northwest, I'd include Northern California in that equation. We would expect our water to be out for 6 months to a year in the event of a 9-point earthquake. And we expect FEMA to not be able to respond to major population centers for at least 2 weeks after that event because there's so many people and there's a compromised infrastructure. So given all those things, your faucets aren't running, FEMA's not coming for a while, and the infrastructure is compromised, setting aside water is one of the most important human things you can do. And you can get water from lots of different supplies. Aquatainers downright are what I've done with my family and what a number of workplaces do as well. They hold 7 gallons, 2 aquatainers per person is a good way to go. They're stackable, they're durable, they're meant to hold water. On the cheap side, looking down left, people can just fill up pop bottles with tap water. That's perfectly acceptable. You can't do the same trick with milk jugs. It's all about the grade of the plastic. You need to make sure that you're choosing a plastic that's durable and that is meant to hold water for an extended period of time. Water never spoils. Water lasts forever. What decomposes is plastic. So you need to make sure to choose high-grade plastic and to change that water out every 6 months to a year. Looking up on the upper right, you can always melt the snow on your lawn if it's that time of year. Looking right below the canned food, we have life straws. I recommend having life straws in your home, in your business, and in your car. And what they can do, it's a common camping implement. It can pull microbes and bacteria out of puddle water. It's not meant to pull gasoline out of a river. So you need to look at the directions pretty specifically, but life straws can be a real lifesaver. And canned food. Canned food is actually a source of water as well, because of course that food is sitting in water. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, if we scale up a bit, so that was kind of more on the individual level. I've given a lot of talks to Nike about, just to their audience, about home preparedness. And Nike had an aha moment. I'm really glad they did. They said, we have this massive body of water, this pond, right on campus at our headquarters. What can we do so that we can make sure that the 6,000 to 10,000 people who set foot on this campus on a daily basis have access to clean, safe water in the event of an earthquake? And so what they did, next slide, is they bought a filtration system called a NOAA Nomad. This is a filtration system that can filter 100 gallons of water per minute. And of course, this is Nike, so they put their branding all over it, just as you would expect of Nike. But what this means for a business is get creative. You don't have to just necessarily start filling up pop bottles full of water. You might have other sources of water right there at hand that you can make expedient use of if you have the right equipment. Next slide. And here's another thing for individuals. This is where preparedness stops. Preparedness, I think, stops at the moment you're supposed to have a family plan. I think people have an easy time filling up water containers. They don't struggle emotionally with securing their water heater to make sure it's safe. What people really struggle with when it comes to earthquake preparedness is the possibility of being separated from your family. This is my family, by the way, and my wife and my plan is based on the worst case scenario, which is, next slide, the event that we find ourselves separated from each other and our 3 kids at 3 different schools during this earthquake, and also the possibility of having to cross a bridge to get to one of them. Part of making a plan is an understanding of the timing and the responsibility and the places that you're going to go after an earthquake. I know perfectly well that my responsibility after this earthquake is I am to go get my daughter down left and my son, Jack, upper left, and that my wife's responsibility is to go get Cyrus, our youngest son, and that we are then to meet, next slide, at home. That's our plan A. And we also know that our home is at risk because it's not really built for an earthquake. It doesn't have a foundation. I'll say that again. Our home does not have a foundation. It is built on stilts. So it's not likely to fare well. So we know that if we don't find each other at home, that we are going to have a plan B. The plan B is the closest park. It's a place my kids know well. It's a place that we can put up a tent. It's a place that we can feel safe and that the community will naturally gather. And we also know that our park, our favorite park, is in a possible liquefaction zone. So we have another plan C, another park outside that neighborhood where we have planned to gather in the event that plan A and plan B don't come together. Again, the importance of it is the willingness to sit down and actually have this conversation. It's a conversation that individuals struggle to have with their families because it's a difficult one. And it's a conversation that I think it's difficult for businesses to have, all the different backup plans in the worst case scenario. Next slide. So as far as emergency communications, I'm going to scale up. I was kind of talking about the family level there of the communication plan, which means having a lot of plans beforehand. When it comes to a business, depending on your scale and size, there are a number of actual communication plans that you might put in place as far as being able to maintain actual telephone contact with each other. I'm giving you a snapshot of Intel and what Intel has done to make sure that it can maintain telephonic contact after an earthquake. Because, of course, telephones are oftentimes compromised by the earthquake, in part because cell towers go down and then they're on generator fuel that runs out, or because everybody's trying to make phone calls at the same time and it simply crashes the system. So what you're looking at Intel is their best case to worst case scenario for what they're going to use as a primary means of communication. Starting down at the bottom, just simple internal desk phones and external telephones. That's their plan A. Secondarily, they've got their cell phones, primary carriers, and alternate carriers to see if either one of those will work. And then we get into kind of the more serious stuff that I haven't seen a lot of places do. They have government-issued emergency telephone service calling cards, which you can see on the upper left there. There is a wireless priority service that the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has available. I don't know to whom this is available. I think when you're with Intel, you probably have different strings you can pull, but nonetheless, that's something you might look into as an alternative. And then to the last two resorts, satellite phones will work after any size of earthquake, as long as they are charged, because of course they are going through satellites there in the sky. And ham radios as the very last resort. Ham radios, of course, require that you have a license, but there are a number. What Intel has done actually is they've started to identify all the ham radio hobbyists that they have, so that they can organize these people into a club, so that they know who some of their go-to communicators will be in the case of a 9-point earthquake striking Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. Next slide. And then, and this is a business operation we're looking at here. Having an emergency operations center identified with all the equipment that you need to carry out business as an alternative to where you're carrying out business now would be a necessary business step. This is what we're looking at here. This is a military grade emergency operations center that is a go-to, but it doesn't have to look like this. I want to show you a really downscale emergency operation center that was put together. Go ahead, next slide. By a local business in Beaverton, Oregon called Tektronix. Tektronix is actually right in the neighborhood of Intel, and they did something really simple to put together an EOC, an emergency operations center. They just identified basically a shipping container that was being unused in a back parking lot, and they started to load up that container with communications equipment, with food, with water, with sleeping bags, with fire extinguishers, with all the things that they could think of that would be usable and needed after a major event. The important thing and the consistent thing in what we're looking at is having identified a place off-site or nearby as an alternative to where you're doing business right now, that you have key people who are assigned to go there, you have the key equipment you need to carry out some level of communication and operations there, and that you're maintaining it with the right equipment and supplies. Next slide.
So it feels like a key idea that's coming out of this is that while many of us enjoy going camping when we can plan for it, that in the aftermath of an earthquake, camping is going to come to you. Yeah.
Well, yes, exactly. And so I'm trying to make this relatable, right? Because earthquakes are so infrequent and impactful that we have a hard time wrapping our minds around it. So if you go to the next slide, I want to just try to make this a little bit more tangible for any audience, because a lot of us in the United States, and particularly in the Pacific Northwest, we do like to go camping. And earthquake preparedness is really just about camping coming to us. It's the exact same idea. So whether you're a business or an individual for that matter, that all those camping supplies that you see at REI, all those camping supplies that you see at your local big box retailer, all of those things are basically preparedness items. What camping is, it's when you willingly go to a remote place for an extended period of time without services, right? We play preparedness all the time, and we survive it. We've figured out how to warm up weenies over a fire. The idea of earthquake preparedness, whether you're a business or an individual, and if you can go to the next slide, is to be ready for spontaneous camping, which is a different idea. So here's the thing about an earthquake. Go ahead.
That I love that you framed this as spontaneous camping. I'm so much more likely to prepare now for spontaneous than disaster.
Well, the other way I sometimes frame it is it's evil musical chairs, right? Eventually the music's going to stop and you just aren't sure where you're going to sit. And I'm pretty sure most of us would agree that during any earthquake, you don't know where you're going to be, but it's very, very likely that you're either going to be at home, in your car, or at work. Between those three places, that's probably 99% of your time between those three places. Or you're traveling out of state, right? In which case, maybe you've traveled outside the seismic zone. Good news for you. But these are the three kits you have. These are the three ways that you need to be able to spontaneously camp. Clearly, for anybody, your home kit needs to be the biggest one because you're most likely to be at home. You've got other families there family members there that you're responsible for. So this is my kit, by the way. And oftentimes when we think of kits, we think of, something small and like suitcase sized, and we've got a few Band-Aids in there and a bottle of water. Kits need to be robust if you're in a earthquake zone. So I've got a 45-gallon Rubbermaid Tough Neck on wheels with everything I need for a family of 5, including food, water, clothing, emergency radios, first aid kits, crowbars, and a number of other items. My second largest kit is the one I keep in my car. Because when you think about your car spends time at home, so it's an additional layer of protection and supplies for home. Your car probably spends time with you at work, so you're bringing an extra layer of supplies to work. And your car is with you when you're traveling on the road. So if you find yourself completely outside your city in an unfamiliar place during a major event, you're still able to take care of yourself until you're able to get back home. And of course, you should have some things at work as well, because you've probably got a 1/3 chance of being at work during this. And the idea of any kit is essentially this. Look to the next slide, please. The idea of any kit is you're trying to, by artificial means, replace the utilities and services that you lost as a result of the earthquake. You are likely to lose gas, heat, electricity, access to your debit card, flushing toilets, telephone communications and internet, access to the grocery stores, running water, your car, and medical attention at the exact same time. And so the items that you put in your kit are meant to be a stopgap measure until those services come back on. And if you're looking at, and to put my business hat back on real quick, and as far as business operations, it's easy to forget that your staff, their first priority is, of course, going to be what? It's going to be their family, right? Your staff's home preparedness is absolutely vital to your business operations, because at the end of the day, if your staff is not ready at home for a big event, they're going to wait to come back to work. It's going to further delay. The more problems they have at home after a big event, the longer they're going to wait to come back to work. And the longer they wait to come back to work, the less operations you have. And the less operations you have, the less cash flow. That tells the story of how a business can go out of business due to an earthquake, just the simple loss of its people. So investing in one way or another, at least as far as time and encouragement, investing in your staff's home preparedness is in fact part and parcel of your business continuity strategy.
So in the preparedness space, do earthquakes get less attention and research than hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes?
Both no and yes. On a yearly basis, you're going to see a lot more attention go towards floods and hurricanes for a really obvious reason, because hurricanes and floods happen every single year. And this year is no exception, right? We see Hurricane Michael coming quick on the heels of Hurricane Florence. And last year we had Hurricane Maria, Irma, and Harvey come through in quick succession. So on an annual basis, yeah, you're seeing floods and hurricanes and tornadoes much more often. But the level of scrutiny that earthquakes occasionally gets blows everything else out of the water. I don't know if anyone's read this article. It's worth a read for how fascinating it is. It's called The Really Big One. It was an article by Catherine Schultz that was published in 2015 in the New Yorker magazine. And it was all about how big the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake is and how poorly prepared the 10 million people who would experience this earthquake are. So do earthquakes receive as much attention as as floods and hurricanes? Maybe not, but I don't think a hurricane article would win the Pulitzer Prize either. So the answer is always yes and no. I think earthquakes really fascinate us because of all natural phenomena. They are the most poorly understood.
So I want to jump in with a question that was on kind of the previous topic from our audience. Regarding family kits, why not each member having a kit? What if the person in charge of the kit gets trapped? What would be the best way to address this?
If the person with the kit gets trapped? I don't quite understand.
I think, here's what I think, is that you showed us your personal kits. So your home kit, it's a shared kit for your entire family, and then your car and work. I'm imagining that somebody like you who thinks about earthquakes all the time, that the rest of your family probably has their own kits with them as well.
So that home kit is for my entire family, and my entire family has access to that. We're a one-car family, but if we were a two-car family, I would have a kit in both my wife's car and my own car. So the idea with any family kit is that it's for the whole family, and accessibility is key. Also, the place you put it, making sure that it's accessible, is a key factor. You don't want to put your kit, for example, in the basement. The problem with putting it in the basement is that I bet your basement stairs are not up to seismic code. I'm willing to bet you right now. And after an event, if your house slides just a little bit off that foundation, it's going to deny your access to the stairs, which are dangerous to go down anyway. You want to put your kit in a place that is going to be safe, that's accessible, and in a place that isn't going to be compromised by things falling on it. So you don't want to put it in a closet with your bowling ball collection. You need to always think about accessibility for your entire family. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. So next question is, what holds us back from adopting this preparedness culture?
How we talk to each other. The way we talk to each other about preparedness is precisely the largest cultural obstacle. I can see it every single day that I try to bring up earthquakes with people. I think right now, if you went into a room, I think even in California, if you went into a room of mixed company and you brought up earthquake preparedness, you would likely get this response. Next slide. Places like California, you've been hearing about the big one for ages. And in Oregon, we've been beating the earthquake preparedness drum for ages, and people get kind of tired of it. And there's not a specific date that we can point to. It's not like a hurricane coming in. And so people will say, you know what? I don't think it's going to happen. It hasn't happened during my lifetime, and so it's probably going to happen during someone else's lifetime. Or sometimes you'll get this next response. We act like preparedness is something for other people, that it's not a normal thing to do, that it's something for the paranoid and the suspicious. We often talk about preparedness as something that is driven by fear, when really preparedness should be about common sense. And next slide. I love this one. I hear this one probably once a week. When I talk about earthquake preparedness and the eventuality of this, someone will throw back, well, I was around for Y2K, and Y2K turned out to not be a big deal. And the reason I bring up these responses is if this is how we talk to each other about preparedness, it basically means we're reinforcing unpreparedness. And especially in the Pacific Northwest, what I see is unpreparedness is normal, is completely culturally acceptable, and we don't challenge people in daily conversations when they find ways to not talk about preparedness. So let's go to the next slide.
So talk to me a little bit about the common sense gap.
You know, I want to say one more thing on the former topic, because I feel like I could make my point just a little bit better. I want to talk real quick about the importance of conversation. So preparedness is a behavior. And where do we learn our behaviors? Do you learn your behaviors from the Red Cross? Do you learn your behaviors from FEMA? No, you don't. You learn your behaviors from people that you know, people you love, people you trust. And if you don't see people around you preparing, then you're much less likely to prepare. The places that are most prepared, places like Chile in South America or Japan, the way people learn preparedness in those places is from mom, from dad, from grandma, from their coworkers. They learn from people who have experienced big events and have changed their lives as a reaction to those big earthquake events. That's one of the things that we have a difficulty with in especially places like the Pacific Northwest and especially in the Midwest, where they've got the New Madrid fault system, is that we just don't see the behaviors that we need to learn in others that we know, love, and trust. And so let's go ahead and go back to that for next slide. Okay, so what is the common sense gap? The common sense gap is a concept that I brought up in my recent TED Talk in April. So the common sense gap is kind of a cultural moment. It's a cultural phenomenon. So when you take a look at the United States and places like the Pacific Northwest and the Midwest, where we've got big earthquakes coming, everyone and their dog knows that there's a really, really big earthquake risk. Everybody knows about it. You bring it up in any room and everyone's going to nod and say, yes, I've heard that there's a big earthquake coming. And then if you ask them, do you actually expect people to get ready for this earthquake? No one says that they actually expect it. Everyone accepts that there's a huge risk that you can do something about, but very few people do anything about it. That's the common sense gap. When you know as a culture what you should do, but you don't expect each other to do it yet. And so smoking in airplanes is another example of the common sense gap. I think very frequently cultures have this moment where I'm pretty sure in the 1960s and 70s, we had a pretty good idea that smoking in airplanes was dumb. However, it was completely culturally acceptable. So essentially you have culture that is pushing behaviors that contravene common sense. That's the cultural phenomena that I call the common sense gap. And it's what we're experiencing right now as far as our level of willingness to prepare for earthquakes in the Pacific Northwest and the Midwest.
So as emergency preparedness professionals, how do we start shifting our approach to earthquake preparedness?
So we have to start shifting away from fear-mongering. Fear-mongering is the go-to tactic because it's really easy. It's really easy to say, oh, you know what, there are going to be 12,000 casualties and fatalities in Oregon in the case of this earthquake. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. If people were really driven by fear, I think that we would have a lot more of a reaction. As it is, we have a lot of anxiety in these earthquake zones and not a lot of action. So here's a different model. Here's how we actually spread preparedness culture. The first thing let's just take this at the office level. Let's boil this down to a small community, your office. And right now you think that maybe in your office, the emergency manager should be the person who is pushing preparedness. That might not be the case. Your emergency manager, your risk manager may not be the best messenger of preparedness. What I would ask is, who is the most well-liked person in your office? Identify the most well-liked person in your office and the CEO of your business. Those are the people that you want to get on board to be the leaders of this preparedness movement in your office, because they are the people that are most likely to be listened to. If you're an emergency manager, help to feed them the information, the messaging that they need to lead their people. And then when people see leaders, be it either emotional leaders, the people that we like, or actual leaders like our CEOs and presidents taking action, here's what you might see next. Number 2, the true believers. These are the people who get it, right? When you see someone walk into the office and they've got an earthquake kit, the true believers will jump on board quickly because they've always secretly thought, God, why aren't we doing more to prepare? but it was not within the culture of the workplace. So the leaders set the tone, and it lets the true believers, which I would say is probably 10 to 15% of your office, they will follow suit quickly, which then sets off the next reaction. Number 3, the reluctantly willing. These people, their participation is a coin flip, right? That they could go either way. It's like, yeah, maybe getting ready seems like a good idea, but I'm not sure if I'm up for it. Once they see leaders and true believers, that first 15%, 20% of the office take action, they're likely to follow suit because we want to be on board with a changing trend rather than behind it. And then that largest cohort, the reluctantly willing, can actually impact the last cohort, the people that I will call the eye rollers. These are the people that are truly reluctant. They don't like to go along with anything. And listen, I'm not judging anyone for being an eye roller. I think we're all eye rollers in different social scenarios, but preparedness, some people are very truly reluctant to react and to prepare. But when you see suddenly that your leadership and a significant number of people, maybe 3/4 of your office, are suddenly adopting a completely new behavior that you know deep down is just commonsensical, even the eye rollers are likely to come on board because you don't want to be left out of the cultural trends that are moving your office. You don't want to look like a jerk when everybody else is being a good sport for really good reasons. So it all starts with choosing the right leaders. The right leader isn't necessarily the person who knows most about preparedness. The leader might be the person who people are most likely to listen to. That's who your leader is to get things started. Let's go to the next slide. And the other way to shift that mindset is how we talk about preparedness. I think the best way to talk about preparedness, it's not to lecture people on getting water. And again, it's not about lording, the possible casualties of an earthquake. It's about showing what you're doing. This is my 5-year-old. We went out and built a kit. We went and bought all the supplies, and you fell asleep on it. That's all we need to see. Preparedness, at the end of the day, preparedness is personal. It is really personal. It is about changing the way you live your personal life at home. If you want people to make a change in how they personally do things, the most effective thing that you can do is show that you yourself have made those changes. I think the visibility of preparedness is one of the missing elements. So part of shifting that mindset, don't lecture people. Just show people that you have made the change and that really at the end of the day, you're just doing the best you can for the people that you're responsible for, like your kids.
So tell me about drills. Why are drills important to an earthquake preparedness program?
So the reason for drills, first, you gotta understand that people are likely to be in groups during an earthquake, which sets off a social chain reaction that can go either for the better or for the worse. So first of all, what we're looking at here is the earthquake in Japan, 2011, and we're in a very social setting. And you can see right now that we're not seeing proactive safety behavior. We see people standing around having no clue what to do whatsoever. We see this bizarre scene of the staff actually becoming a human buttress for the wine rack. Those are some social reactions. They're hard to understand. If we look in the background here, no one gets hurt in this video, y'all, but what we see in the background, again, 2011 Japan, is we see the facade peeling right off the front of this building, and we see one person after another, running into the most dangerous spot that they can be. Those are actual social reactions that take place. And the reason you see those reactions, if we look to the next slide, is because your brain becomes a lot different during an earthquake. During an earthquake or any emergency where you are scared out of your mind, your smart brain, your frontal cortex goes really quiet. It gets really cold. And you don't want that because your frontal cortex is the smart part of your brain. And instead, your dumb brain, your amygdala, your alarm bells, those little glowing nuggets in the middle, they'll start making decisions for you. Your amygdala are likely to tell you to do one of three things. One, next slide. Your amygdala will tell you to follow the leadership of the most confident person in the room. Not the smartest person in the room, not the person giving the best guidance, but rather the most confident person in the room, such as you see these people holding up the wine rack. Bad move. Your amygdala might tell you to next. Completely freeze. You start looking through millions of years of evolutionary history and you find out, hey, you know what? I've never had an ancestor that's been in a wine store during an earthquake. I've got no instinctual response for this situation, and you do nothing. Or even more likely, three, people will start to run like crazy. All three of these reactions we saw are potentially dangerous. And the only way to get your dumb amygdala brain to do the right thing is through repeated physical practice, because it's all about muscle reflex. Next slide.
Excellent. Well, there we are. That's the end of our presentation. I know that we already answered some questions in real time, but if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat window now, and we'll ask them. Okay, so I've got one here. Can you give us an example of the types of supplies you keep in your car?
Sure. In my car, I'm just going to go from memory here. I've got food, shelf-stable food. I actually have MREs, kind of like food rations there that have a 10-year shelf life. I've got water, actual physical water. I've also got a life straw. I have a poncho because it might be wet. I have an emergency blanket. In emergency blankets, they look really flimsy, but they hold on to 95% of your body heat. I have a first aid kit. I've got a pair of hot hands. Again, I'm anticipating this happening in winter. You always want to plan for the worst case scenario. I have an emergency radio, because I'm anticipating that my cell phone is going to be out and I'm going to be relying on a battery-powered or crank-powered radio to get up-to-date information on what I should be doing and where I should be going. And I'd say those are the key items. I could go on, but those are the high points.
Excellent. I think that's it for questions. I'm going to keep going, but still, if anyone has additional questions, pop them into the chat. If we get to them in time, I'll ask them. Otherwise, we'll follow up with additional information on our blog. I'd like to invite everyone on the call to take our emergency preparedness assessment tool. It's just 10 questions that help you gauge how prepared your office is to tackle any emergency situation. You can find that in the resources section of our website, alertfind.com. I'd also like to invite everyone to join us in our next webinar. It's October the 24th, next week, with Bob Clark. Bob Clark wrote a really amazing tabletop exercise based on responding to a zombie apocalypse. This training exercise is designed to engage your staff in training, but it's by building around the zombie theme, but it's actually teaching core preparedness principles of avoid, deny, defend, which are key to responding to active shooter situations. So excited to talk to Bob next week about training and engaging your staff in emergency preparedness. And we'll be sending invitations, but you can also find this in the resources section of alertfind.com. If you would like to see a demo of our system, AlertFind, we are an emergency preparedness or emergency notification system built for business continuity professionals that allows you to keep in touch with your staff no matter what the disaster. You can schedule a demo at our website. And if you'd like to learn more about Stephen's work, redcross.org/prepareoutloud. His contact information is also here. Stephen, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This was incredibly enlightening. I have personally learned so much as a resident of California about what I should be doing and what I've been neglecting to do. So thank you for everything that you shared with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks, everyone. We hope to see you next time.